8 people were killed with an axe inside a small white house in Villisca, Iowa, on the night of June 9th, 1912. Every door was locked from the inside. Every window shade was drawn. Every mirror in the house had been covered with cloth. How does a killer slaughter an entire family and 2 visiting children, then take the time to hide his reflection before walking out into the dark? Investigators would spend more than a century trying to answer that question, and they never truly have. In the next few minutes, I will walk you through 8 victims, at least 4 serious suspects, 2 grand juries, and 1 piece of evidence that still troubles historians today. Pay close attention to detail number 3, the one about the kerosene lamp, because that single object may be the closest thing this case has to a confession. If you follow real, carefully researched cold cases, subscribe. On dark cases, we cover a new one every week. To understand what happened in Villisca, you have to understand the town itself. In 1912, Villisca, Iowa was a quiet farming community of about 2,500 people, tucked into the southwestern corner of the state. It had churches, a school, a railroad depot, and the kind of streets where no one locked their doors at night. That detail matters because whatever walked into 508 East 2nd Street on the evening of June 9th, 1912, walked in without breaking anything. There were no shattered windows, no splintered door frames, no signs of forced entry at all. The house belonged to Josiah B. Moore, a well-liked 43-year-old businessman who ran a farm implement store in town. He lived there with his wife Sarah, who was 39, and their 4 children, Herman, aged 11, Mary Catherine, aged 10, Arthur, aged 7, and Paul, aged 5. That Sunday evening, June 9th, the Moore family attended the Children's Day program at the Presbyterian Church. Sarah Moore had helped organize the event. On the way home, Mary Catherine brought 2 friends with her for a sleepover, Ina Mae Stillinger, aged 8, and her sister Lena Gertrude Stillinger, aged 12. The Stillinger girls had asked permission by telephone to stay the night. Their parents said yes. It was the last conversation they would have with their daughters. The Moores and the Stillinger sisters arrived home sometime between 9:45 and 10 o'clock that night. Neighbors would later recall seeing lights in the windows. Then, one by one, those lights went out. Somewhere in the hours between midnight and 5 in the morning on June 10th, 1912, someone entered that house and killed every single person inside. 8 victims, all in their beds, all struck in the head with the blunt and cutting edges of an axe. The axe belonged to Josiah Moore. It was found propped against the wall in the downstairs guest bedroom, wiped clean but still stained. The discovery came the next morning. Mary Peckham, the Moores' next-door neighbor, noticed something was wrong just after 7 a.m. The Moore family had not come out to do chores. The chickens were not fed. The curtains were still drawn. Mary Peckham let out the Moores' chickens herself, then knocked at the back door. No answer. She tried the door. It was locked. She called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore, who came over with a key. Ross opened the door, walked into the parlor, and then into the downstairs guest bedroom. What he saw sent him back onto the porch within seconds. He told Mary Peckham to call the sheriff. He would not let her go inside. By mid-morning, the house at 508 East 2nd Street had become the scene of one of the most chaotic crime investigations in American history. And this is where the case begins to unravel, not because of a lack of evidence, but because of what was done to it. When word spread through Villisca that the entire Moore family had been murdered, people did not stay away. They came. By the afternoon of June 10th, an estimated 100 townspeople had walked through the house. Some accounts place the number closer to 200. Neighbors, curious onlookers, even children, wandered from room to room, stepping around bodies, touching furniture, picking up objects. There was no crime scene tape in 1912. There was no established forensic protocol in small-town Iowa. By the time the National Guard finally arrived to secure the property, whatever fragile physical evidence the killer had left behind was, for all practical purposes, destroyed. Still, investigators were able to reconstruct part of what happened. All 8 victims had been killed in bed, apparently while asleep. The wounds were consistent with an axe swung by a single assailant, in most cases striking with the flat side rather than the blade. Josiah Moore had suffered the most severe injuries, suggesting the killer may have targeted him first. Sarah Moore and the 6 children were killed where they lay. Only one victim, 12-year-old Lena Stillinger, showed signs that she may have briefly regained consciousness or moved before dying. Her position on the bed and defensive marks on one arm suggested she had, at some point, been aware. That single detail has haunted this case for over 100 years. Now, before we go further, one word about tone. Everything that follows is drawn from coroner's records, contemporary newspaper reporting, and the extensive research of historian Dr. Edgar Epperle, who has studied Villisca for more than 50 years. This is not a story to be dramatized. 8 people, 6 of them children, died in that house. What we are trying to understand is how and by whose hand. When investigators walked through the house on June 10th, they noticed a series of small, deliberate details that suggested the killer had lingered after the murders. Every mirror in the house had been covered, either with cloth or with clothing. The glass on both the front and back doors had been covered as well. A slab of uncooked bacon, weighing about 4 pounds, was found on the floor near the axe. Another piece of bacon was found in the icebox. No one has ever explained the bacon. Some researchers have suggested a superstition, others a signature, others simply hunger. There is no consensus. And then there is the third detail, the kerosene lamp. 2 kerosene lamps were found in the house, one downstairs near the Stillinger girls and one upstairs near the Moore family. Both lamps had their chimneys removed and set aside. Both were burning at a very low wick, just enough to give off a soft, controlled light. This is the detail I asked you to remember from the beginning of this video. Because a killer who takes the time to remove a lamp chimney, adjust the wick to its lowest setting, and place the chimney carefully on the floor, is not a killer in a rage. That is a killer who is calm, a killer who intends to stay in the house. A killer who does not want to be seen through a window, but who wants, for reasons we still do not understand, to be able to see his victims. Investigators also found a bowl of bloody water in the kitchen and a partially eaten meal on the table. The killer, it appeared, had washed his hands and eaten something before leaving. He had then locked the doors behind him. All of this happened in a house that at some point contained 8 sleeping people and 1 person with an axe, and no one on that quiet street heard anything at all. Within days, the case became a national story. The Burns Detective Agency was hired, followed by the Kirkpatrick Detective Agency, and later by state agents. Rewards were offered, theories multiplied, and suspects began to emerge, each one carrying his own shadow. The first, and for many years the most publicly accused, was Reverend George Kelly. Kelly was a traveling Presbyterian minister, small in stature, with a documented history of erratic behavior and mental illness. He had attended the same Children's Day program at the Presbyterian Church on the evening of June 9th, the very service the Moore family had attended. He left Villisca on the early train the next morning, before the bodies were discovered. In later years, Kelly would write letters describing the crime in detail. He would eventually confess twice to the murders. He would then recant both confessions. Kelly was tried in 1917. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The second ended in acquittal. Historians remain divided on whether Kelly was a genuine suspect or a mentally ill man swept up by an obsession with the case. The second suspect was Frank F. Jones, a state senator from Villisca and Josiah Moore's former employer. Moore had left Jones's implement business in 1908 and started his own competing store, taking with him the profitable John Deere account. The rivalry between the two men was well known in town. According to one theory, Jones hired a man named William Mansfield, a suspected serial killer, to travel to Villisca and eliminate the Moore family. Mansfield was later investigated in connection with several axe murders across the Midwest, including the killings of his own wife, infant child, mother-in-law, and father-in-law in Blue Island, Illinois in 1914. A grand jury looked into the Jones-Mansfield theory in 1916. Charges were never filed. Mansfield had documented payroll records placing him in Illinois on the night of the Villisca murders, though skeptics have questioned the reliability of those records. The third suspect is the one that changes the shape of this case entirely. His name was Henry Lee Moore, no known relation to the Villisca Moors. Henry Lee Moore was convicted in December 1912, just 6 months after Villisca, of murdering his own mother and grandmother with an axe in Columbia, Missouri. A federal agent named M.W. McClaughry began mapping a series of axe murders that had occurred across the Midwest and the South between 1911 and 1912. The pattern was chilling. Families killed in their beds at night, axes taken from the property, mirrors sometimes covered, lamps sometimes altered. Cases in Colorado Springs, Ellsworth, Paola, Monmouth, and Villisca all shared unusual similarities. Agent McClaughry believed a single traveling killer was responsible, moving by railroad. Henry Lee Moore fit some elements of the profile, but he was never formally charged with the Villisca murders, and the evidence connecting him remains circumstantial. There is a fourth name that appears in the records: Andy Sawyer, a drifter who was reportedly seen in the area, who carried an axe, and who behaved strangely when questioned about Villisca. He was investigated and cleared, and there were others, dozens of others, whose names surfaced and faded over the years. By 1917, after Kelly's acquittal, the official investigation effectively ended. No one was ever convicted of the Villisca axe murders. The case has remained open, in a legal sense, for more than 110 years. So what do we actually know for certain? We know that on the night of June 9th into the morning of June 10th, 1912, someone entered a locked house in a small Iowa town. We know that person killed 8 people, 6 of them children, with an axe that belonged to the family. We know that person took the time to cover mirrors, adjust lamps, wash his hands, and eat food before locking the doors and disappearing. And we know that despite 2 grand juries, multiple detective agencies, and more than a century of research, no one has ever been held legally responsible. The house at 508 East 2nd Street still stands. It was restored in the 1990s and is now operated as a historical site by private owners. Visitors can walk through the rooms where the Moores and the Stillinger sisters spent their last hours. Historians continue to work on the case. Dr. Epperly's archives, held at the State Historical Society of Iowa, contain thousands of pages of documents, letters, and interviews. Every few years, a new researcher revisits the evidence, hoping to find something the last one missed. And every few years, someone points back to that kerosene lamp, the one with the chimney removed, the wick turned low, the steady, patient light, because whoever adjusted that lamp knew exactly what he was doing. He was not panicked, he was not fleeing, he was working. And when he was finished, he blew the flame out, walked to the door, locked it behind him, and stepped into a June morning in Iowa that was already turning warm. More than a century later, the identity of that man remains, officially and completely, unknown. If this case stayed with you, do 3 things before you close the tab. Subscribe to Dark Cases so the next investigation finds you automatically. Share this video with someone who studies unsolved crimes, and leave a comment with the suspect you find most credible: Kelly, Jones, and Mansfield, Henry Lee Moore, or someone whose name has never surfaced at all. We read every reply. Next week, another case, another locked room, another silence that refuses to break.